The church seeks to guide and give us counsel in this area of sexuality, not only on the individual level, but probably we see and hear about this most in the press and all about sort of big issues and causes that that exist in the world. For example, question 414 in the Youcat says, "What does the church say about using condoms to fight against AIDS?" This is probably one of the areas of the church's teaching in sexuality that is, seen in the press most often and probably most misunderstood. And I really would like to go into this. I think, once again, there's a very beautiful answer. Apart from the fact that condoms provide no absolutely safe protection against contagion, condoms are not even, completely effective just on the material level, the church rejects their use as a one-sided mechanical method of fighting AIDS epidemics, and advocates above all a new culture of human relationships and a change in social consciousness. A one-sided mechanical method of fighting AIDS. Again, it goes back to that when we were looking at that at the very beginning, that question of the fact that we are sexual beings, that our sexuality is not just some sort of mechanical process that we do and we can figure out some sort of mechanical solution to this problem. And that's what condoms try to do. They try to say that this piece of latex or something can solve this fundamentally really moral question that's a misunderstanding, a misuse of our sexuality, and a misunderstanding of who we are as sexual beings. Something that mechanical and that physical could never really get to the root and heart of the problem. And that's what the church seeks to address, and really calling us, for example, to acquire and grow and struggle to grow in that virtue of chastity, to live this life of integrated sexuality in our lives. And that is the true solution to the crisis of AIDS and really the crisis of any other sexual problem in the world. Another place where we see the church's teaching about in the area of sexuality, very often in the public or social sphere, is about homosexuality, and that's what the very next question in the Youcat is about. What is the church's judgment on homosexuality? And again, the Youcat gives this answer that is in accordance with what I think the church has always said, and what Jesus himself said when there were questions raised about sexuality. It was to look back at what God intended from the very beginning. And so the answer begins this way: God created man as male and female and destined them for each other in a bodily way as well. And so we see that marriage is the union of man and woman, and the marital act, sexual relationships between a man and woman, are really built into us even physically, and are also so built into us, though, in the totality of our being as human beings. That idea that, we are men in the totality of our being if you're male, and we are women in the totality of our being if you're a female, not just in the mechanics of sexuality. And so that homosexuality is not in keeping with that. Now, that attraction of people of the same sex exists in our world, and yet the church teaches that any activity based on that is always morally wrong, while at the same time completely recognizing the dignity of the people who struggle with same-sex attraction, and wants to provide them with every aid in acquiring, in their own struggle, in that particular struggle, the virtue of chastity in their lives as well. And then finally, we really want to come to what this is all about, what this is supposed to all be leading to, and this is marriage. Again, we look at the essential elements of Christian marriage, of unity, of indissolubility, of openness to children, and to the commitment to the welfare of one's spouse. And these are the essential requirements for Christian marriage. they are the essential requirements of the sexual aspect of Christian marriage as well. And so that marital embrace, I think that's one of the most beautiful ways to describe a sexual encounter in this way. The marital embrace is really the sign on the physical level and the manifestation and the expression and experience of that total self-giving love that is supposed to exist within marriage and be protected within marriage. And that's why it exists in the Christian understanding only really legitimately within marriage. I think the world does not understand how high and beautiful an image of an understanding of marriage that the Christian church has. The Youcat quotes C.S. Lewis here as saying, "Christianity has glorified marriage more than any other religion, and nearly all the greatest love poetry in the world has been produced by Christians. If anyone says that sex in itself is bad, Christianity contradicts him at once." And so we look also at this aspect of fruitfulness in marriage, of the possibility of a child to which any authentic sexual encounter between husband and wife should always be open to. A child is a creature and a gift of God, which comes to earth through the love of his parents. Isn't that a wonderful way to think of what a child is? And what a really distinctly Christian view of what a child is. Not a product, a commodity, a burden, or any of those sorts of things. A child is a creature and a gift of God, which comes to earth through the love of his parents. Even Shakespeare says that children are blessings. Again, got all these quotations down the side of the page. And so, well, that raises the question, well, how many children should a married couple have? Well, again, in its very wonderful, straightforward way, the Youcat says a Christian married couple has as many children as God gives them and as they can take care of, take responsibility for. And so this openness to the action of God of entrusting his children to them and being responsible for those children. So, of course, the church understands, and in question 420, may a Christian married couple regulate the number of children they have? And the Youcat answers yes. A Christian married couple may and should be responsible in using the gift and privilege of transmitting life, but always should do so, and only should do so, in accordance with what the church teaches us, that every act of the marital embrace, of sexual relations within marriage, should be open to the transmission of new life. Now, through a proper understanding of our human fertility, we can know times when it is very unlikely or impossible to conceive a child, and also times when it is much more likely to be able to conceive a child. That is the premise of what we call natural family planning, or sometimes NFP for short, by which couples can sometimes use this as a way to, for good reason, to regulate the timing of the conception of a child, or can seek, maybe if they're having difficulties in conceiving a child, can use this knowledge in order to increase their likelihood of being able to conceive a child. I want to stop and just tell you just a funny story here at this point. A man I know very well who has several children was on the way to a wedding with a number of his children. One of his younger sons asked him, he was always excited about the parties after a wedding. This little one asked his father, he said, "Is there going to be a conception after this wedding?" And all the older brothers were laughing about that. And his oldest brother said to him, "Well, we can certainly hope so. We should certainly hope so." And that is the Christian desire, that this is the fulfillment, the sign of the fruitfulness, that something has gone right in this marriage and in this act of love. Well, having mentioned to you NFP, natural family planning. I also wanted to just make sure that you understand that all methods of artificial contraception, either by barrier methods like condoms, or chemical or hormonal methods like the pill, or even through sterilization or of the husband or the wife, all of those are always contrary to the openness to new life, and are therefore always immoral. I encourage you to delve more into this teaching of the Church. It's very sometimes misunderstood, but very, very fundamental, and is founded in our time most importantly on the encyclical of Pope Paul VI, Humanae Vitae, which I really recommend for your reading, especially some predictions he makes at the end about what will happen to a culture that adopts a contraceptive mentality that we have seen sort of tragically come about in our culture as well. Of course, there are also couples who are unable to conceive a child. As I mentioned before, sometimes couples are able to use the knowledge that's gained through NFP in order to help with those problems of infertility. I know a couple very well that has been the case for them. Just recently, after a long time of desiring to conceive a child, they have it now through that knowledge that came through a deeper understanding of their own fertility. They've been able to conceive a child, and thank God for that. Sometimes, though, there are couples who are unable to have children, and so God invites them to be generous and fruitful in their love in other ways, perhaps through adoption, or perhaps through other ways of giving and sharing their love very, very generously. And there are methods of trying to aid couples in order to be able to conceive a child, but there are also in this area as well immoral methods that actually come in between the husband and wife, or insert a third party into that most intimate of all human relationships. And so question 423 asks, what is the Church's judgment on surrogate motherhood and artificial insemination, or artificial fertilization? The Church, all assistance in conceiving a child through research and medicine must stop when the common bond of parenthood is loosened and destroyed by the intrusion of a third person, or when conception becomes a technological act outside of sexual union in marriage. Every child really fundamentally has the right to know that they were a product of an act of love between their parents, and not a product of some sort of technological production. And that is one of the fundamental things that the Church teaches about this. So again, I just want you to understand that things like in vitro fertilization are contrary to the Church's teaching, and also open the door to many, many other moral quagmires. So again, sometimes that is not known very well. So I encourage you to know more deeply, to study more deeply these areas, but to understand why the Church teaches that. But I at least want you to know what the Church teaches in that regard, if you should find yourself in the situation of facing a situation of infertility. There are definite limits on what the Church instructs and guides and helps in order to protect the marital union and the marital bond. Finally, of course, the greatest offense, the most direct offense against this commandment is the act of adultery itself, where two people, at least one of whom is married to someone else, have sexual relations. It is the most fundamental betrayal of married love, and it can never be justified in any circumstance. I'd like to look also not only at the 6th commandment, that we should, thou shalt not commit adultery, but also the 9th commandment, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. This is an example of how it is not just enough to observe the law of God and the natural law and our external behavior, but it also really needs to be written on our heart as well, that we don't dwell on impure sexual things even in our heart, apart from any sort of external actions that we might commit. The ninth commandment is meant to protect marriage. It is meant to protect love. It is meant to protect the beauty and the purity of sexuality. And this is something that we really need to remember how precious is the gift of pure love, the virtue that the virtue of chastity seeks to protect. The ninth commandment is meant to protect this union of marriage. The shelter of marriage and family must not be endangered through playing with fire. In other words, through reckless indulgence in the erotic energy that crackles between man and woman. And I think, we all know the allure, the ability that we have to rationalize things, to look at things that we shouldn't look at, to engage in conversations that we shouldn't engage in, to enter into relationships, flirtatiously or something like that, that we really have no right to, or are not going to lead to anything good. And we know how easy it is, to rationalize these things. And so that is what we, the ninth commandment is, really search your heart. I was saying one time, somebody was talking about seeing a movie that had some, impure things in it, and somebody said, really, it was really, really a good movie. There were only like a few bad scenes in it or whatever. And I said, well, what about if you came over to my house for breakfast and I brought out a big bowl of scrambled eggs, and I said, almost all of these eggs were good. There were only 2 or 3 rotten ones that are in there, and everything. Would you eat the eggs? They all turn up there. No, never. So we have to be careful not to fall for those kind of rationalizations. That's really what the virtue of modesty is about. It's to help us to protect the virtue of chastity as well. To have a desire to have really a purity of heart, not just to be our external actions be okay in some sense, but really even our hearts to be pure from the inside out. The last question on the ninth commandment is one that I find very interesting, and so I encourage you to look at it. It's 464. What good is shame? Well, I think most people right off there say, well, shame is no good. But actually, in a certain sense, if we are ashamed, for example, of something that we have done, that helps us to protect and to a great mystery. Shame safeguards a person's intimate space, his mystery, his most personal and inmost being, his dignity, but especially his capacity for love and sexual self-giving. I think the strangest quotation in all of the Youcat that I have found is right here from the most unlikely of sources, from a very, very hostily anti-Christian philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche. Shame exists wherever there is mystery. Well, think about that a little while, but here's one that's a little easier to get from maybe a little easier and safer source, St. John Bosco, who loved young people so much and wanted them to have purity and joy in their lives. St. John Bosco says, "Act today in such a way that you do not need to blush tomorrow." Thank you.